Good afternoon, Howard Wiig, Code Green, ThinkTech Hawaii. We've got a really lively show for you today, and one which will hopefully contribute to Hawaii's path to 100% clean energy by the year 2045. Very ambitious, but by George, we're doing it. And today's program may take us a step closer to that. Gives me great pleasure today to introduce Mike Ewell, the CEO of Energy Justice Network. He's coming to us today all the way from Philadelphia. And this is a really interesting topic regarding the burning of biomass. When I first started out in this business, biomass was a hot, pun intended, topic, and we all thought it was the cat's pajamas. Well, there's been a lot of rethinking about that, and maybe our host or our guest, Mike Ewell, may be the responsible party for getting our thinking totally different. And we've got a whole lot of ground to cover. So welcome to the program, Mike, all the way from Philadelphia.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks for having me.
And again, I thought this was years ago that burning biomass for energy was really a good, clean thing. And you are saying no. And I've gotten to know you well enough to know that you have done a heck of a lot of research on this, and you have been in this field for a long time. So please take it away, Mike.
Sure. Thank you, Howard. So, I've been involved in working on issues around biomass and waste incineration for about 30 years now. And biomass is one of the things that we're often taught is part of that laundry list of clean energy sources or renewable energy sources. So we see wind, we see solar, we see hydro, and then biomass is always in there. And part of it may be because some just want a nice long list of things that they can point to as options. But really, as I studied this on both whether it's burning trees, grasses, burning landfill gases, or burning trash or other wastes, we find that they're among the most expensive and polluting ways to make energy. And in terms of waste incineration, the most expensive and polluting ways to manage waste. They're actually dirtier than, when we're talking about global warming, at least, dirtier than fossil fuels, dirtier than burning coal. And in a lot of other measures, also dirtier than coal or the other fossil fuel equivalents. So it's not the clean energy we're often taught.
Yeah, that's pretty mind-boggling, Mike, because we all think clean, wood, and our ancestors grew up, burning wood for cooking and for space heating and so forth.
Mhm. And there are some differences in what we're talking about because our ancestors didn't have over a century of industrial pollution pumped out from the burning of fossil fuels and other things. And if you look at reports on how much mercury or how much radiation or other pollutants that are coming out of burning of anything or from the normal operations of nuclear reactors or even the fallout from bomb testing, all those things that are pollutants that every year you see the list of this is how much was put out from this plant this year, this many tons, this many pounds. And then it starts over next year and you see a certain amount of tons and pounds, but all those add up over more than a century now. Where have all those pollutants gone? Well, in a lot of cases, trees have become the sponges that are absorbing those things. So our ancestors didn't have that problem with trees being as dirty as they are now. And what shocked me the most in studying this is when I found a study out of Europe that said if we apply the same test that is used to determine whether coal ash is hazardous waste and apply it to the ash from burning wood straight from a forest. We're not talking the construction and demolition waste, treated wood, which is even more toxic, but clean wood straight from a forest would qualify as hazardous waste in Europe if held to the same test because of all the metals and things that they've absorbed over decades.
Yeah, that is mind-boggling. And I think we have some slides to go with all of this.
Yeah, we can go through those. Do you want to pull them up? Thank you. So let me introduce everyone to the Clean Power Task Force. I've been working with some wonderful residents from the Big Island, from Oahu, and others from the other islands, but mostly those two islands have been participating so far. And they formed a clean power task force that has the mission, it's an all volunteer group, it's like activists, clean energy advocates working together to figure out how we make sure that Hawaii's goal of 100% renewable energy is clean energy, because we don't want the burning of trash and trees to be part of the mix when we know and have learned that these are some of the biggest polluters in general, and specifically on certain islands in Hawaii right now, are among the largest air polluters that are on the islands where these currently exist. So the mission statement here is basically aimed at cleaning up the definitions of the state's renewable energy mandate, so that we make sure that when we reach that 100%, that 100% is not something that has burning going on. That's not smokestack technologies meeting a renewables definition, but truly clean stuff that doesn't have to vacuum up resources like trees or waste, burn them, create air pollution and ash as a byproduct, but something that's truly renewable. So the state's definition of renewable energy, when it has a mandate for renewable energy on a certain percent per year, and it jumps up on a periodic basis, this is the actual definition, although it says the sun instead of solar, but it's the same thing. So every other thing is word for word what the state law says. And the ones in red are the ones that involve burning something. There are also some that some would question and say geothermal, given the history and track record they have on the Big Island, not the cleanest option either. So we're questioning that, but that's not part of any proposal right now to remove that. Same thing with hydrogen at the end. There are a lot of concerns across the country with how hydrogen is being produced and whether it's clean, even if it's from, quote, renewable sources. There are companies like one on Oahu talking about taking construction and demolition waste and using an incineration-like process to then make hydrogen from that. And knowing, having studied a lot about the toxic metals and other toxic chemicals in wood treatment chemicals, we're very concerned about proposals like that if we're trying to make hydrogen from such a dirty waste stream. But what we're focusing on right now is those three that are in red. So you have biogas, biomass, and biofuels. So let's go to the next slide and see what that actually means. So there are a lot of things that have bio in their names, and you should automatically be skeptical if you hear bio anything, like biosolids is the public relations industry's like contest that was held actually to rename sewage sludge. We all know sewage sludge is ick, bad stuff. And then they literally held a PR contest, and biosolids was the winner. So now everyone calls it biosolids, and that's supposed to make it sound good. So when you hear bio as a prefix and things, you should be skeptical, because there are a lot of things that are dressed up like that. So bioenergy is an umbrella over biomass, biofuels, and biogas. And the main difference being whether it's a solid, a liquid, or a gas. That is what we're talking about. So in the state law, there's a definition of biomass that includes burning waste. So the trash burning from H-Power on Oahu, that is legally considered biomass in the state definition. And when you pay more on your electric bill for renewable energy, you're in part, if you're on Oahu at least, subsidizing that large polluter on that island, H-Power. If you're on Kauai, the subsidy that is going toward renewable energy there is supporting the burning of trees at a plant that's actually called Green Energy, is the name of the company there. So that is currently what's on the ground. And there are proposals like on the Big Island with Huhanua to burn trees there, and that would also fall into the biomass definition. So here's a picture I took of Huhanua. That's a plant that they're trying to reopen and start burning trees. They would be burning eucalyptus trees primarily, about 5 acres a day, and it would take 7 years to chew up all the trees on the Big Island that are in these eucalyptus plantations. And a lot of people are rightfully concerned because there have been efforts twice now to build a trash incinerator on the Big Island, that building something that has a lifetime and a payback time of about 30 years, that they're going to turn to trying to burn waste once they burn up all the trees. So that would make it even more dangerous than it already would be just from burning trees. So these are just some of the pollutants that are released when you burn biomass, whether it's trees or trash or any other solid fuel. you get a witch's brew of different chemicals that are coming out, whether it's nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks, the particulate matter that causes heart attacks and strokes, or the toxic heavy metals like lead or mercury that even are in trees when they are burned. And you get some emissions of those, but you get much more when you burn trash of those types of pollutants.
Yeah, Mike, this was one of the surprising things in preparing for this, the fact that we're burning, as you've discussed before, this nice clean wood. And just like our bodies are not so clean, just with the pollutants that we take in through our lungs and so forth. Ditto with trees, they store up really bad stuff, and when you burn it, it gets released into the atmosphere.
And it's a shame that we've contaminated the planet to this degree, but leaving those in a stable state like in a tree is much better than vaporizing and putting in the air and having a toxic ash that can then blow around and leach into groundwater more readily. So this is just some of the data from comparisons of biomass incinerators, their actual permit limits in state-issued permits compared to coal power plants per unit of energy. So an equal analysis of if they were the same size plant, which one's going to be dirtier. And what was found was that they're far dirtier on a number of different pollutants. This is not an exhaustive list. They were dirtier on a number of other things as well. But analysis of a number of permits found this. And that's rather startling because we all know coal plants are dirty. They're one of the dirtiest things out there. The AES coal plant on Oahu was recently closed down and is no longer going to be burning coal. But there's still the burning of trees on Kauai and trash on Oahu and threatened plans to burn trees on Big Island and trash elsewhere as well. So this is just a slide we made with EPA data showing how trash and biomass incineration compare on global warming to coal, oil, and gas. And I should add the caveat that natural gas is actually likely worse than coal because of all the methane leakage, but this chart is just based on what's coming out of the stack. So don't think natural gas is necessarily a better option because it's lower here. But burning trees is about 50% worse than coal for the climate per unit of energy. Burning trash using EPA's older data, as we initially did in this analysis from until about 2013, it was 2.5 times that of coal, or 150% more than coal. Since then, they changed their model and they say it's only 70% worse than coal, which is still significant to say it's that much worse than coal. But EPA has not been able to back up those numbers with hard data, so we don't know which number is actually the right one yet.
Mike, is that because maybe in trash there's so much plastic and there's all kinds of different plastics? Might that be the prime source of pollutants from trash?
For greenhouse gases and for a number of other things, yes. The fossil fraction of trash is more than half. And a lot of that is plastics, which are oil-based or gas-based in some cases. And so there's still fossil fuels. A lot of what is in trash is fossil fuels being directly burned in the form of plastics and other materials. But somehow they get a free pass in any climate policy that focuses on fossil fuels. You will not see that applying to trash incinerators. We can go to the next slide. The point here is when they argue that biogenic carbon doesn't count, you might have heard this notion that biomass is carbon neutral. Well, that's as if we pretend that rays of sunshine go through the atmosphere and interview each molecule of CO2 and say, did you come from a tree? And the molecule says, well, yes, of course I did. And then ray of sunshine is saying, great, I won't heat you up then. I mean, that's not how it works. There's no magic tree carbon, but scientists or climate experts, climate scientists who have worked in this field over a decade ago have pointed out that this is scientific fraud to be counting biomass as carbon neutral, partially because they're double counting. Climate models already assume that plants are regrowing. And yet companies that burn trash or trees try to say, oh, well, this is a closed loop, trees regrow, therefore don't count our carbon, but the coal plant and other plants get counted. Well, you would be laughed out of the room if you were saying, I have a coal power plant, but our carbon emissions are zero because we plant enough trees. But with the biomass facility, they argue that. Yet in the case of Huanua, they have no plans to plant trees. In the case of a trash incinerator like H-Power, they're also not replanting anything that wouldn't normally be replanted if they weren't burning that waste. So they can't get a credit and get a free pass to not count that carbon. But even if somehow that made sense, studies like one out of Massachusetts about 12 years ago, the Manomet Center for Conservation Sciences was hired by the state government to answer the question about whether biomass is carbon neutral. And what they found is that there's a big lag between when you plant trees and they suck up that carbon again. So if you were replanting trees and you weren't just cutting them down in the meantime, then it would take about 45 years for trees to suck that carbon back up to be equal to coal. That's that extra 50% get down to as bad as coal. That's not carbon neutral after 40 years. That's as bad as coal after 40 years, 45 years. And it would take hundreds of years to get to carbon neutral if you don't cut those trees down. We just don't have that kind of time to play with the time lag that exists, even if they were making more trees be planted to justify this.
Now, Mike, you brought up another very interesting point that I was not aware of. I assumed, of course, Huhonoa would be replanting trees, but their proposal is just to cut them down to stumps and then just leave the ground there.
They've talked about possibly replanting somewhere not in Hawaii, but maybe in the continental US. They've theorized about that, but they have no contracts, no commitments to replant. And some of the landowners that own the land under these eucalyptus plantations have said they don't want to replant it. So there are no plans on that island or anywhere in the state to make sure that there's replanting that is equivalent. But even if there was, that doesn't fix the problem.
You can only imagine. I mean, we've got acres and acres and acres and acres of just stumps. Mm-hmm. What in the world can you do with a whole bunch of land that's full of stumps?
That's a real head scratcher. I've been talking to people on the Big Island, folks who are foresters and know a lot about this, and they've informed me that there is no good way to get rid of them unless they put a lot of poison down to make sure those stumps don't regrow on their own. Right now, they're 7 feet apart, spaced apart, which is too close to be growing them thick enough to use for lumber. So they've planted them in an inconvenient distance, and those stumps will then have offshoots basically growing so that it won't be as clean and orderly as it currently is. And they won't be able to stop that unless they put in the money and resources to somehow grind up all those stumps or lay down the poison or both to make sure that they're not just going to regrow haphazardly.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, so this just a few slides on waste incineration. This is the H-Power incinerator. It's owned by Cavanta and is publicly owned by the county. You can find a lot more information on incineration on our website, energyjustice.net/incineration. So that's a 3,000 ton per day trash incinerator. It's the third largest incinerator for trash or any kind of waste in the whole country. They burn much less than that, though. And 2 of these burners are quite old. They're about 32 years old. The average age of trash incinerators, there are 48 that closed since 2000 so far. There are no new ones really opening up. Very rare. There's one that opened in Florida, but that's the only one in more than 2 decades. So the existing fleet of incinerators are aging, and the average age of those 48 that closed since 2000 was only 24 years old. And those 2 older burners are missing 2 of the pollution control devices that most incinerators have. The ones that control the nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks, and the one that reduces the amount of mercury and dioxins, dioxins being the most toxic chemicals known to science. Now, they have a 3rd burner that's relatively new. That's only 9 years old now, but they're still not using modern technology to really reduce the levels of nitrogen oxides that trigger asthma attacks to what modern technology would allow. Okay, so this is just some data on how much they're putting out. They're one of the largest air polluters on Oahu. You can see where they rank. For some pollutants, they're number 1. For others, they're in the top 5. Now that the AES coal plant is closed down, those rankings are going to probably bump up by 1 on some of the ones where they're not already number 1. And when we studied this, we know the company operating the plant, they've made claims that all the health studies out there show that incinerators have no effect on public health. Don't worry, be happy, the science is okay. Well, we looked at that. We looked at their footnotes, the footnotes of their footnotes, found things that they were leaving out, misrepresenting, found other studies that they weren't looking at. And there are a number of studies that do show health effects. Of course, there are plenty that don't, because it's hard to find them, because pollutants move, people move. There are a lot of reasons why studies have a hard time finding health effects. But when enough of them do, that's cause for concern. And a lot of the ones that do found elevated cancers of various sorts, plus cancers generally, and also elevated respiratory diseases and cardiovascular diseases. And this is just back to my point on incineration being more polluting than coal. You can see the analysis that we did of a number of different pollutants. We have, if you visit that website, energyjustice.net/incineration, you'll find that worse than coal page. There's fresher data on there with the newer comparison we did with the latest data on additional pollutants as well. And for most of them, coal is less polluting than burning trash. And when we studied it, we did a life cycle analysis of the most comprehensive, we used the most comprehensive software out there to look at 9 different criteria from landfills versus incinerators. And of course, incinerators come with ash landfills too, like you have on Oahu. So it's not one versus the other, it's landfill versus having both. And having a smaller but more toxic landfill for ash is not necessarily better. What we found was that burning trash was twice as bad for the climate and about no more than 3 times as bad than landfilling when you factored in the other pollutants that trigger asthma and cancer and other health problems. And I think there's the last one here. This is the zero waste hierarchy. That's something I developed that's now used as an international standard. This is what we should be doing with waste. You'll notice that incineration is in the unacceptable category at the bottom. The backstop is landfilling. You still have landfilling, like I just said, with incineration, but it's less dangerous to have one with trash in it than with ash. But what you really want to do is you want to go upstream, rethink and redesign things, reduce, reuse, recycle, which we all know is in order for a reason. But we want to add the composting and the back end steps, like pulling extra recyclables out of the trash stream mechanically so that we get even more out when people put things in the wrong bin, and stabilizing the residuals that are left so that when they're in a landfill, it's not going to be a gassy and stinky landfill, but it'll be a stable, smaller one. That is the best way to manage waste systems. So that's my contact information. So yes, what else can we cover in this?
Well, we still got a couple of minutes here, Mike. One question is the fact that H-power reduces the volume of trash by a factor of 10. And to my knowledge, there's 2 types of ash, the fly ash and the bottom ash. And I think it's the fly ash that can be reused as a component in concrete.
The fly ash is actually something that ought to be regulated as hazardous waste. And in many other countries, it is regulated as hazardous waste. In Germany, they actually treat it like nuclear waste. They put it in nylon bags and zip them and put them in salt mines. It's that dangerous. Yet in the US, industry has gotten away thanks to testing that EPA switched the test on. They used to call it special waste. And then when a lawsuit went to the US Supreme Court, and the court said, if it tests hazardous, it's hazardous. No more giving a special category, EPA. So EPA switched the test. And they made it so that chemically never comes up hazardous, which is very crafty because that kept the industry alive when they can't afford to dispose of this as hazardous waste, even though under the old test, that fly ash would test hazardous about 90% of the time, and the bottom ash about 40% of the time. But they now combine them, dilute it, do some other chemical tricks, and come up with the test result that says, oh, it's not hazardous, let's build things with it, which never tends to work out, so they end up landfilling it anyway. But it's very dangerous in a landfill. It's not something we want to deregulate and put into concrete and pretend that the toxics are not going to expose workers in the community when they ultimately break that up, not mention when they make it.
Yep. As you well know, you're going contrary to the industry spokesperson there. Finally, we have been talking about a new landfill forever. And you and I, or I know Oahu well enough to know that absolutely nobody wants a landfill in their backyard. And if you think about Oahu, there's no place else but where it is. So there again, the H-power reduces that volume. That's a very constant argument made.
Yeah, the big concern I have is more with the construction and demolition waste, because that landfill is expected to fill up in the next few years. And I'm worried that they're going to start trying to burn that in the AES coal plant, perhaps, and try to call that renewable energy. And it's already defined that way and would get credits for doing so. And that would be very toxic to be burning. We've studied that and written up a whole paper on how dangerous that is. But the Waimanalo Gulch landfill, as opposed to the PVT landfill for the construction waste, the Waimanalo Gulch landfill is where the ash is going. And there's plenty of space there. They've artificially created this deadline of closing it by, I think, 2028. But it would be very unrealistic to expect that they're going to come up with a place to put a new landfill on the island. They've already found 4 places that are only the ones eligible, and no one's going to want any of those places. And yet they have many years of life left at Waimanalo Gulch. What I think would make the most sense is a zero waste plan that ends incineration and uses that landfill, but fills it up as slowly as possible with the best zero waste programs available, so you maximize the space you have and don't contaminate additional sites.
Mike, you are an absolute gold mine of information on this. And just to reiterate your email address, say, because it's so easy, mike@energyjustice.net. And I'm sure you'd be glad to hear from constituents on this.
Absolutely, yes. Please get in touch with me. I've been in touch with a lot of great folks across the state, and I'd love to plug anyone new into that work.
Okay, thank you again so much. This certainly has changed my attitudes, and I've been in this business for forever. So on that cheery note, must be bid fond adieu to all of you. ThinkTech Hawaii, Code Green. See you next time.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.